Okay. Hello, my name is Avneet. I'm a full-time member of the LaRouche organization in Canada, out of Montreal, where our headquarters are. And I'm going to go through something very important, a very important milestone in mankind's history, which was the 1648 Treaty of Westphalia, and why this basically established an idea, a concept of a nation, of a country for the first time, somewhat effectually, before the American Revolution finally realized it more fully. But this idea of a sovereign nation, and of a sovereign nation being responsible for its own actions, was not violated so openly till now, till you saw Libya, Syria, so on, so blatant violation of it. The problem was that when this violation occurred, very few people around the world, very few leaders understood that why this is such a big deal. Why is it that when Tony Blair attacked Westphalia in 1990s, like a year before 9/11, what's the big deal? Okay, so we need a global community. And it was only LaRouche, it was only our organization that really understood what's being attacked here. And that's what I'm going to go through my class, is what was Westphalia. Because John F. Kennedy, in one of his televised speeches, said at one point that, we have the opportunity of becoming the best nation, the best generation, or the last generation. And this is not, this is JFK, this is not LaRouche, although LaRouche is the only one ever since who has said that. Now, the best generation means that you take on the mission for humanity. You are responsible for giving your nation, your humanity, a real mission. And the problem today is a lot of people don't think that way. When the Dow goes down 0.5%, it's national headlines. But the fact that 9,000 children starve in sub-Saharan Africa every day, 500,000 children starve or they die in India every year, this is not national headlines. You don't have people cringe to that. You don't have, oh my God, that's terrible, we should do something. And why do these 500,000 children die? Because there's no soap. They lack soap. So how are you going to change the situation? Are you going to give them soap? No, you need to improve the culture, the whole economic infrastructure. You need to increase the relative population per density, what LaRouche talks about. That's how you change the paradigm right now. That's the mission right now, which we have adopted, which is the basis of our movement in the United States, Canada, and 20 different nations around the world. This is what we do. And right now the eyes of the world are on the United States. What are you going to do? What are the Americans going to do? Do they realize what's at stake? And do they realize they have the power to change the situation? And I can tell you, every thinking person in the world is looking to the United States to act. This is a very big responsibility. And I hope my class helps you understand why we have the authority. It's not something that cannot be done. It has been done. And this is actually something the United States used to do. Not just under John F. Kennedy, but way back, even the founding fathers, but then especially under John Quincy Adams, which LaRouche called last week the golden age of America. Because under John Quincy Adams, not as president, but under Monroe, what he drafted pretty much was the Monroe Doctrine, was an idea that we're gonna take responsibility for the development of South American nations and colonies. You may be a colony, but we're going to ensure that you are treated fairly as a human being, as a sovereign culture. So we're going to prevent the British Empire from looting you, from raping your resources and so on. That, in very broad brushstrokes, was the Monroe Doctrine. And but this idea, the concept of a nation, of protecting a nation, of the general welfare being more important than profit, this did not just come from John Quincy Adams' mind or the founding fathers' mind. This came from Europe. This came from the Treaty of Westphalia. And even before that, this came from Cusa, which I'll go in later. But this is very important because, if you look at the Nuremberg tribunals, when the Nazis were tried, they were tried for war crimes and other crimes. Killing the Jews was like number 4 or 5, not higher than that. The number 1 crime was invasion of other nations, of violating international treaty, violating the nation's sovereignty. That was a number 1 issue. That's because that as a principle is much more important. And that's why when you meet any liberal idiot on the street who says, well, I don't see Obama killing Jews, tell them well, that's not exactly what we tried the Nazis for, actually. That was not the number 1 criteria. The number 1 criteria is violating the general welfare, violating human rights. That's it. That's what United States has been doing over the past decade. Okay, so we come to the 30 Years' War. Because the problem today is that the Treaty of Westphalia is called as, if you study it in universities, it's taught as the peace of exhaustion. That everybody just got exhausted of fighting for decades, and they said, well, can't we just find a way to get along? I don't have any army anymore, and we don't have any food, but that's not what happened, because that would have happened much earlier. Because although they're called the 30 Years' War, they had been going on in one fashion or the other since about 100 years. Just like you can say World War I never really ended. Except for a decade here or a few years here, the world has been continuously at war ever since the past 100 years. And that's exactly what you had in 1500s till 1600s. And so you had, but with the Treaty of Westphalia, what came before was, you had villages which were completely decimated of population. You had, this is Germany, Austria, Switzerland, France, and all the red and purple areas are areas where the population dropped 50%. And the rest of the areas are much less. In many of these regions all over Europe, it took these villages about 100 years to get their population back up to their original levels, pre-Westphalian levels. And so you had many of these villages where you wouldn't find any men, only women and babies, And it's not just people were dying in battle. That's the funny thing, because it wasn't just because people are dying fighting each other. You had a complete collapse of civilization, because when all the men are fighting, who's going to grow the crops? Who's going to cultivate? Who's going to tend to the farms? Who's going to, because you need to continuously build a civilization, roads, agriculture, shipping, all that. None of that was happening. So you had people who died of plague, diseases, and just neglect. Infant mortality rate was through the roof. 1 in your 20 children survived on average. That's what's happening today. That's the United States mortality rate for women. If you look at the red areas are the regions where more women are dying than, the mortality rate of the death rate among women is increasing, often through birth, giving birth or after birth and so on and so forth. But this is 1600s. But this is the present in the United States. So the point was you had in Europe emerge a strong, very small, but a very intellectually strong force against this crap. And one of the people who led it was this guy, Mazarin. He was a cardinal. So he was a priest. Much like Cusa, who was also in the church. But these guys weren't just praying. These guys were actually politically active. They were actually organizing a leadership across Europe to get away from the Dark Age and to create an alliance based on progress. So the two of the main people who led the whole thing was Mazarin and this young guy, Jean-Baptiste Colbert. Colbert was a very prominent figure, and they were in France. They were out of Paris. And Mazarin was the tutor of Louis XIV, who was at that time, he basically started tutoring the emperor since he was a child. the emperor wasn't that sharp, but because he was under strong guidance and a strong leadership, France took on the role of pushing the Treaty of Westphalia. And this is something which culminated, in 1648, where many of the opposing forces came together and signed the treaty. But this wasn't just, one-day affair, because the collaboration and the dialogue had begun for about a decade before. But what were they talking about? They were talking about this guy, Cusa, the real precursor to the Renaissance, the real precursor to the idea of of having a nation without the divine right of kings, that you can have a republic, that the idea that every man is created in the image of God. And he wrote many books on learned ignorance and so on and so forth. And these books weren't just nice books, they were being discussed by the topmost intellectuals in Europe, forcing them to change their identity, forcing them to realize that, that this actually makes sense. That the idea of a man created in the image of God is actually very, very important concept in changing anything. But what does that mean? That doesn't mean, Jesus walks on water, so you walk on water. It's not superpowers. Man is created in the image of God through the mind, through his thinking. That through his thought, he can actually change the universe. He can actually change his surrounding nature. So Cusa's writings were very important. And there was no mass communication. So if you want to have a dialogue, if you want to, Mazarin was sending people all over Europe. And in an age without mass communication, it was quite work, because it took a month to get a letter anywhere. And then it took another month to get the letter back. In the meantime, your horse may get tired, or your horseman may get shot, and so on and so forth. This was quite a tedious affair, but they still did it. And in 1648, you had the signing of the treaty, which is actually, we're going to read 2 articles from it. Who wants to read?
Up top or Article 1?
From the top.
The Treaty of Westphalia of 1648, bringing an end to the 30 Years' War, which had drowned Europe in blood and battles over religion, defined the principles of and equality in numerous subcontracts. Is there a word missing?
Oh, principles of sovereignty.
Oh.
Sorry.
So the treaty defined the principles of sovereignty and equality in numerous subcontracts, and in this way became the constitution of the new system of states in Europe. We quote the 2 key principles. Article 1 begins, "A Christian, general and permanent peace, and true and honest friendship must rule between the Holy Imperial Majesty and the Holy All-Christian Majesty, as well as between all and every ally and follower of the mentioned Imperial Majesty, the House of Austria, and successors. And this peace must be so honest and seriously guarded and nourished that each part furthers the advantage, honor, and benefit of the other. A faithful neighborliness should be renewed and flourish for peace and friendship and flourish again. Peace among sovereign nations requires, in other words, according to this principle, that each nation develops itself fully and regards it as its self-interest to develop the others fully, and vice versa. A real family of nations."
Right. So your advantage lies in the advantage of the other. You have to see the challenge of seeing yourself in another person, in your enemy. Seeing a human being in a Nazi, it's not the easiest thing, but it's there somewhere. But that was the idea, that you are your own worst enemy. That if you want to fight real evil in the world, it's not going to be by killing another human being. You have to seek the advantage of the other to kill an evil. It's a pretty hard concept. But you want to keep reading Article 2?
Sure. Article 2 says, On both sides, all should be forever forgotten and forgiven. What has from the beginning of the unrest, no matter how or where, from one side or the other, happened in terms of hostility, so that neither because of that nor for any other reason or pretext should anyone commit or allow to happen any hostility, unfriendliness, difficulty, or obstacle in respect to persons, their status, goods, or security itself, or through others, secretly or openly, directly or indirectly, under the pretense of the authority of the law, or by way of violence within the kingdom, or anywhere outside of it. And any earlier contradictory treaties should not stand against this. Instead, the fact that each and everyone, from one side and the other, both before and during the war, committed insults, violent acts, hostilities, damages, and injuries, without regard to persons or outcomes, should be completely put aside, so that everything, whatever one could demand from another under his name, will be forgotten to eternity.
Okay, so the idea of the past does not govern the future. Your past actions are in no way going to help you reach your conclusion towards a better future, towards any future. So that was really key, of forgiving your enemy completely, no holds barred. That's how you have a real alliance, because that's how they succeeded in undermining an empire, which basically succeeds by divide and conquer, by always working on somebody's vice or somebody's weakness. But when you have an idea of an alliance of nations in the advantage of the other, no matter what, that's not what you have today. That's not the intention of Obama. Period. Ukraine, the government is good or wrong, the opposition is Nazi or not. The intention of Obama, of Victoria Nuland, Tony Blair, has never been honest. They don't have a right to go into Afghanistan or Iraq or any country and say, oh, we're here to protect you. We're going to protect your population. We're going to save you from Saddam or Assad or Musharraf or whatever. No, because they never really cared. Where were you? Where was London when these people were starving? When Iraq was begging for grain at the IMF or the United Nations? When these third world nations were begging for nuclear energy in 1970s? What did these guys do then? No. So what gives them the authority now to be the champions of peace and liberty? So this is really important, because that's pretty much the fundamental principle by which you judge. Because yeah, the Ukrainian government, they're corrupt. They're not the best people you would want. But you definitely don't want the empire in there. So this was the Westphalia. I mean, there's a lot of articles. These are just 2 articles in it which should give people an idea. This was completely revolutionary. This was not easily done, but it happened. And then, it really challenged the whole idea of an empire, which exists by killing people, by treating people like slaves, whether the Boston Massacre or India or Ireland or anywhere else in Africa. The idea that the world is fixed, and I'll come back to that later, because that's what they actually say, that in their mind the world is fixed. You can't change it. You can't change Africa. You can develop these people. You can develop Afghanistan. You can never solve poverty. But that's not what Westphalia had said. The idea is that man is created in the image of God, and when you have a leadership that understands that principle, you have breakthroughs made. Now, the problem is that wasn't all. It wasn't that people came together, signed a document, everybody can go home and we can drink some wine. There was actually, the real work had to be done. That now that we have an alliance, we can actually figure out how to build a future. And the funny thing was that at that time, before 1640s, people had no idea what Europe looked like. Like the idea of a longitude, a map is divided into latitudes and longitudes. The idea of a longitude came after Westphalia. It was developed after Westphalia in France due to Colbert's reforms. So people really had no concept of a Europe, just like people today don't have a concept of the world or the solar system. They can't even name the 9 planets in order, and they want to go into Ukraine and topple the government. They probably couldn't even point Ukraine on a map a year ago. And so the idea of, the way Mazarin, Colbert recruited leadership all over Europe was by recognizing that, hey, we have a lot of potential along the Rhine or the Danube, the Vistula, the other rivers, that we can actually, work on these river systems, develop them. Because the point was, especially the Rhine, most of the battles were fought for the Rhine, the control of the Rhine, that whoever controls the Rhine controls Europe, because this was a major navigable river. It had a port. You could then take your, trade with the rest of the world. And the region around the Rhine was very fertile, not just for crops, but also for ores and stuff, which is why this region was, World War II, it was the Versailles Treaty. The Rhine Valley was the biggest thing, the area which was taken away from the Germans and which led to their depression, but that's another thing. But the point is, this region, the control of this region determined authority. But that's what Westphalia challenged, because Westphalia challenged that no, power does not come from authority. That was a big, just because you own the land doesn't make you the authority, does not make you the decider of the destiny of your people. And so what these people would do, because you had all these little kingdoms and all these little dukedoms all over the Rhine, and these people would tax the shit out of people if they want to go through the Rhine. So you have no economy, because the idea is, well, if you want to make money, it's like today. If you want to make money, if you want to make profit, you got to steal. The idea that, well, if you're making money, somebody's getting poor, right? You're taking it from somewhere if you're making money. That was what was happening back then. The idea that, okay, if we want to make money, we got to tax people or we got to steal from people. That's what Westphalia challenged, that no, free trade is not how you're going to change the world. Free trade is not how you're going to build Europe. And what Westphalia brought forward was fair trade, that we're going to reduce the taxes, we're going to improve the population's capability of labor, of producing, and of mining ores. But this is what is pretty good. Who wants to read? I don't like reading. Do you want to read? You should read. I need a volunteer. Okay, you want to read? Sure.
Fair trade on Europe's rivers. In 1642, Mazarin summoned his negotiators at Munster to announce and circulate everywhere that the precondition of the peace negotiations was to forbid the creation of new toll along the Rhine River. The proposition was written as follows: from this day forward, along the two banks of the Rhine River and from the adjacent provinces, commerce and transport of goods shall be free of canvas for all of the inhabitants. They will no longer be permitted to impose on the Rhine any new toll, open birthright, customs, or taxation of any denomination and of any sort whatsoever. The fact that the injunction included the mention, parentheses, notations, and from the adjacent provinces, proposed to bring fair trade and economic expansion deeper into the heart of Germany.
Right. So the authority and the control of Rhine is not just for the people there, but it's for the adjacent regions. It's for the benefit of everyone. The idea of general welfare, So this was really key for later on for the United States to understand. But so now, through this treaty and through Colbert's reforms, you had some really important work done, because Colbert was the one he was like the Alexander Hamilton. He was the young, bright guy who had the motivation and the guts and a certain authority and an opportunity, but also, mentors, really serious mentors like Mazarin and Pierre Fermat, who was a very famous scientist. These guys taught, and they taught at Colbert, and Colbert listened to them and was their student for all his life. But Colbert pushed this idea for the first time of fair trade versus free trade. And even to this day in university campuses, the idea of Colbertism or dirigism or Colbert trade or Colbert economy is hated. People hate it. London School of Economics attacks it to the day. But this is what made Europe. This is why Europe, even till day, has not been able to, is still surviving on the reforms Colbert did. Because it wasn't just the treaty, it was a lot of reforms, especially this thing, the industrial Commonwealth policy. Because what Colbert launched was, okay, we're going to now use the opportunity to put people to work. To put people to work for building dams, for constructing riverways, for major agricultural projects. I mean, the scale of TVA, this thing in the industrial Commonwealth policies were like the Tennessee Valley Authority policies of that day. And I want somebody to read. Somebody else wants to volunteer? You want to read? Okay. Why don't you read?
The industrial Commonwealth policy. Colbert's industrial protectionist system is generally known for four major reforms that marked the beginnings of the modern industrial nation-state. First, he organized and funded a system of industrial corporations and infrastructure projects that provided job security for all types of skilled and non-skilled labor. That is, workers of all types of arts et media. What does that mean?
I don't know.
Secondly, he established protectionist measures for all standardized French clothing products, such that no dumping of foreign goods was allowed in France, except at very high cost. Colbertism became synonymous with protectionism. Third, he funded and supported population growth, considering that war and ignorance were the two main causes of population reduction. He believed that the government had to take care of its poor, and that its role was to foster the increase of the population density of the nation. And fourth, he accompanied industrial measures with a reform of civil justice that became the first civil code of France, lasting 130 years until it was destroyed by the imperialist code of Napoleon at the turn of the 18th century.
Right. And this was never changed again. The idea of justice of the civil laws that Colbert laid out, they were taken down in 1800s, late 1700s. They were really never brought back again. The current French law is certain modification of the Napoleon law, but it's not what Colbert had done for 130 years. But this idea, population growth being the main focus, it's not just churning out babies, because the idea is we're going to create a skilled population. This was really important. And the other thing, the number one, that every kind of worker, every kind of work, every kind of art, every kind of skill is important to the nation. That you have to, the idea, the metaphor being like you've got to think about the whole farm. You can't just think about the benefit of the sheep or the cows or the chicken. The whole farm, what's good for everyone is good for any part. So this idea of, we're gonna build a whole nation. This was really important because before Colbert, every law, any law would be made by the people. Like today, Wall Street makes banking law. It's ridiculous. It's the government that should make the banking law, or the insurance companies make the healthcare law. So which leads to conflict of interest, which is what Colbert had done. That no, we need to make a law which is in the benefit of everyone. So even if it means that we're gonna stop the dumping of foreign goods on our shores, okay. But because we have a right and a duty to protect our population and to increase their benefit. So this is what he had done.
During the 1660s, there persisted a 3-century-old privilege that dated back to the shameful 1358 Edict of Charles V, that stated that the laws of commerce are made to profit and favor each craft rather than the common good. Colbert turned this on its head, instituting his first edict on April 8, 1666, which was made to secure all of the manufactures and factories of the kingdom for the benefit of the common good. From that day on, Colbert wrote hundreds of measures and regulations until the entire garden of France began to bloom again after the devastation of the religious wars.
Right. But Colbert, he held many positions during his work, his life, which today you would compare to like the finance minister, secretary of war, secretary of state, foreign minister. He held all these positions for many years at one time or the other. But the problem was that when Colbert was brought in, when he first started doing this, nobody really trusted him. The general population said, yeah, that's fine and good, but this is not going to last. Typical what you have today. Well, yeah, you want to impeach Obama, that's great, but it'll never happen. So that was so Colbert had to really prove, just like, he had to really show people that he meant business. He had to show the oligarchy he means business. One of the biggest scandals, therefore, what he did intentionally was the Fouquet affair. Fouquet, the guy on the right, was the finance minister of France. He was a very close friend of the king, of the emperor. Colbert put this guy on trial for embezzlement of state funds, and he was thrown in exile. He basically had to beg to not be hanged, and he was thrown in exile for the rest of his life. And so, but this scandal, which was like, this is like throwing Jamie Dimon in jail. This happened. We did this. So Colbert's reform, the Fouquet affair was a big, big national headline, so the population really started believing him. Want to read?
Sure. Colbert's reform of justice. The most famous example of abuse of public trust during that period was known as the Fouquet affair, the scandalous case of the superintendent of the finances of King Louis XIV. In November of 1661, Colbert forced Nicolas Fouquet to be brought before the tribunal for having stolen an immense fortune from different public offices and from the treasury of the king. In 1661, the government brought him to trial where he was found guilty of massive embezzlement. All of his goods were confiscated, he was condemned to exile, and then later imprisoned for life in the fortress of Pignerol.
Yeah, there's an island in the middle of nowhere. But this guy had palaces. He was the finance minister for many years. He was nobility. Because another thing, in France at that time, and I think in other regions also around that time, but France, you had the tradition of buying public offices. If you would have a finance minister or any official post, you wouldn't have elections. You would have the nobility give lots of money to buy an office, which actually also happens in Britain today. That's how the House of Lords is filled. You can buy a seat on the House of Lords. That doesn't happen in the United States Senate. Well,
that's how we're getting our ambassadors.
yeah.
Like Blagojevich from Ohio, I think, he wanted to sell the suit.
Yeah, well, it happens, in the black. It happens in secret, but this was out in the open. This was considered natural. There used to be a saying that every time the king creates an office, some idiot stands up to buy it. But the idea, this is funny, but the problem was there was a big problem attacking this. There was a big problem attacking these people because these people were stealing to the tune of millions. Today, like Fouquet had palaces. These people had palaces. But it was considered that, you can't target these people. Why would they steal? They give so much money. No, they give so much money to serve people. Yeah, they give so much money to help the state. They work so hard. They've got such an important job. But that's how people treat Wall Street. Why would they steal? They're in charge of our money. If they steal, they would lose our trust, right? So why would Wall Street want to steal? Yes?
So Colbert allowed reform in France, he put in a great deal, and all this fell apart.
Well, I'm not done with the reforms yet. I'm not done with my class yet.
Okay, but are they going to get you the French Revolution?
No, I'm not going to get to that.
So my question is, why did the French Revolution, Colbert was so successful?
Well, that's a whole different story. We can talk about that later, but that would take me completely off topic. The focus here is the Westphalia, that this did happen. Although it fell apart not because of any problems in itself, any weakness in its own principle. It fell apart because you have an oligarchy. You've had a continuous struggle since mankind's creation of Zeus versus Prometheus. That's why it fell apart, but not from any weakness or from anything wrong with the concept, with this principle. So the idea was, that you can target these people, you can touch them. They're untouchable. They would never steal. Like the AIG, the bank CEO, he gave an interview 2 years ago. He said that targeting Wall Street bonuses is like lynching Negroes in the South. He actually gave it. So that was the AIG CEO. Yeah. So basically, after Colbert's Fouquet affair, what he launched was something like the Pecora Commission, that it's not just Fouquet, it's going to be everyone. It's going to be everybody. Everybody's got to open their books and show me what you own is actually yours. How many people don't know Pecora? Like, Colbert's Pecora Commission. Do people know who Pecora is? Okay. Well, for people who do not know, Ferdinand Pecora, who's the guy on the left, this is him on Time magazine versus Ben Bernanke on the Time magazine. But Ferdinand Pecora was actually an Italian, the son of Italian immigrants. He actually led an investigative committee to investigate the crimes of Wall Street. The report that Pecora created was called the Pecora Commission. This report, which proved that Wall Street had been intentionally stealing from people and knew about the collapse, this was a big push in Glass-Steagall. This was a big push in shutting up opposition. And what happened was J.P. Morgan was put on trial. This really scared the shit out of bankers. Colbert did that. What Colbert launched was really a coup against the oligarchy.
A coup d'etat against the oligarchy, Colbert's Pecora Commission. In March of 1661, the 23-year-old King Louis XIV replaced Nicolas Fouquet with Colbert as the superintendent of finances. After the scandalous trial of Fouquet was over, Colbert became a popular hero and was given the green light for the creation of a chamber of justice. In all, 27 judges were commissioned by Colbert to clean up the biggest financial mess the nation had ever seen. The reforms were so sweeping that in only a few years, a total of 419 million pounds was recovered from the income of venal offices, and no fewer than 40,000 noble families were affected by this axiomatic change. All of those funds were then invested in Colbert's program of development of new industries.
Right. So this was very important, but this showed people Colbert means business. Colbert showed everybody else I mean business. And but it wasn't just, that was not all. There was much, much more. The biggest thing that he did, one of the biggest Westphalian ideas and revolutions was the Royal Academy of Sciences. The idea that we're going to create a leadership among scientists. We're going to bring together scientists from all over Europe. And this is what Colbert did, because Louis XIV, the emperor, he's a young guy. He was 24. And he wasn't serious. He wasn't as sublime as Colbert. He was a playboy. He was easy to go young guy. He was like, why do we have to take on the responsibility for mankind? Why can't I just party? Why can't I just play? But you had Mazarin and Colbert saying, no, this has to happen or else there is no play. We're all going to die. So you had, after much persuasion, an academy was set up to bring in the best minds of around Europe. These were not just political figures. These were hardcore scientists and geniuses. People like, well, I'll show what people, but you want to read?
The Royal Academy of Sciences. This was not just another academic teaching institution, but but rather a research center for scientific and technological development that had the mission of creating innovations in specific areas of scientific activities to improve economic development in the fields of astronomy, chemistry, optical physics, geometry, geography, industrial engineering, canal building, agriculture, and navigation. Each area was to be oriented toward technological advances through the application of new discoveries of physical principles. This Colbertian Academy of Sciences became the model institution from which Gottfried Leibniz later created his academies in Berlin and St. Petersburg.
Right. So this wasn't just a university. This was the hub of, we're going to make breakthroughs. We're going to make breakthroughs in optical physics, in geography, in map making, etc., etc. And we're going to put them to use, because France at that time was going through a big industrial revolution, was going through a lot of work in the agricultural and industrial sector. So this is like putting NASA together. This is like putting the team that's going to build Nawapa, because, and this painting it's a small section of a bigger painting which is in the Louvre in Paris. So next time you go to Paris, remember to look it up. But this is a painting of Colbert and all these scientists presenting themselves to the Emperor Louis XIV. And this is another painting of the scale, because the building was magnificent. It was Greek architecture. And this is a sketch of the whole thing being built, which itself required the best minds to come forward to, architects and so on, to really bring back the Renaissance, bring back the Greek, the Plato school of science. So, and the building was burned down, I think, 100, 200 years later, but it was beautiful. You can take my word for it. It was worth the sight. But you had people like Christian Huygens, the top left. He was a young guy, but he made brilliant. He's very important in physics today, in mathematics. Blaise Pascal, you had Ole Romer, the guy who discovered I don't know. How would you call the longitude? Discovery or invention?
Invention.
It's an invention, yeah.
There's no lines in the
I know.
globe.
Yeah, so invented the longitude, and Blaise, Pierre Fermat on the top left, he was brought in, and the main picture which I should have put up is Leibniz. Leibniz, the young guy at that time, was brought in among these geniuses, blew his mind away, and then who used this concept many decades later to build the Academy of Sciences in Berlin, in St. Petersburg. And then, Vernadsky did the same in Ukraine and in other parts of Europe too. But this was really, really important. And so by this time, France had done a lot of work in building itself up, in helping build the rest of Europe up to a real, really understanding the concept of sovereignty, because now you have an increase in population, plus all your population is well fed. Many of them are thinking, are literate. They all have jobs which are real jobs. They're not street robbers or prostitutes or fighting a war in a foreign country. They actually are involved in building a future. And then the leadership of your regions is actually bunch of intellectuals who are involved in deep breakthroughs in science, philosophy, like Leibniz and so on. So this is what Westphalia had done. This is the idea of Westphalia, an idea of sovereignty, which is a sovereign nation. It's a noetic principle. It's a human principle. Because also one of the major things is in the Westphalian articles was raison d'être, which in French, when you translate it into English, means the reason of existence. Why do you exist? You exist for the advantage of the others, but why do you exist? Why are you so important? This idea was very important in challenging the intellectuals, because that's what people have to realize. One of the biggest problems is that, we blow up if United States ceases to exist, or Russia ceases to exist, or if humanity ceases to exist, if you have thermonuclear extinction, would the universe lose anything? Are we important? Do we have a role to play? I mean, that to a lot of people should be a real existential crisis, that we can't afford to lose humanity. And this is what a lot of these people who got on board with Mazarin went through, a real crisis, existential crisis, that what's the reason of our existence? Why are we fighting? Why am I fighting? So this was really important because that's something that today most people don't understand. And what you had was France. Colbert really challenged the British Empire, the Venetian Empire. It was at that point, because Venice was pissed, because as all these colonies were breaking up, and they were losing their people, and they would not fight wars anymore. They said, well, we don't want to fight anymore. We want to go with Mazarin and build this Treaty of Westphalia. We want to work with the French. So what you had was, through organizing these regions on a higher principle, this completely undermined the empire's power. That's how the empire lost, because the population was organized to realize, well, we don't have to serve an empire. The idea of a divine right of kings, bullshit. That's exactly, but that's what the British Empire, the British monarchy, the idea of why are you a king and I'm not a king, it comes from the divine right of kings, comes from direct,
You got your kingship from God.
Yeah, you were ordained by God to be a king.
Bloodline.
And you can only have kings when the bloodline proceeds in the future. So what you had was Colbert had to wage a really serious battle with Venice. And so you had Colbert had a younger brother called Charles Colbert, he was like an ambassador to other regions. So he would be Colbert's right-hand man. So they would have all these letters which are published, exchanging views and stuff. And one of their letters is that, the British are pissed because we are challenging their authority on the ocean. And so this is really a good excerpt from one of the letters. You want to read it?
Continental challenge to the sea powers. In a letter dated July 21, 1669, Colbert wrote his brother a note in which he stated, as far as the ocean is concerned, even though they, the British, are the more powerful, we have not until now come to the view that their pretended sovereignty has been recognized. Therefore, it pertains to the common good of the two nations and of the interests of the two kings to establish this parity on all of the seas. As for the Treaty on Commerce, the ideas of Lord Arlington are very reasonable, since they tend to establish a reciprocal treatment between the two kingdoms.
Right, because the British were like, well, if you want to trade around the world, go ahead, but you got to pay us a tax, because we own the ocean. Right? It's like the United States telling China, you can go on the moon, but you got to pay us a tax because we were there first. All the region between Earth and Mars, you got to pay us a tax. Yes.
Did the British attack the ships that didn't pay them the tax?
I don't know that. I have an article that I've printed out for people to take. It's also on our website. That's very extensive. I think that would go through that, but I'm not sure. It's the Economic Treaty of Westphalia. People can take it afterwards. But the British, and Colbert was very, he held his ground. He said, no, we're not going to do that. You have no authority. And it ultimately came down to the British saying, well, we at least want your government to salute us when our ships come into your port. it was that silly. But, all that said and done, Westphalia changed Europe for good, for the better, because you had a seed planted that really challenged the empire. And the next time it was done more perfectly was in the American Revolution. Because that's the thing about mankind, is that we improve on our creations. So Westphalia was a less perfect concept, and a more perfect concept was the American independence. And that's what it says in the Constitution, towards a more perfect union. that it's up to us to make it even more perfect, because there's always challenges. There is an empire still, so it is our responsibility to make it more perfect. And this is something today. So I think people by now have an idea of Westphalia, of sovereignty, I hope. Because, I mean, I challenge people, read the whole Treaty of Westphalia, and then read the Treaty of Versailles, the Lisbon Treaty, the NAFTA Treaty, all these free trade imperial treaties, and you'll see the disgusting inhumanity, savageness in them. And you'll see the beauty in Westphalia, because that's a very good homework to do. And I challenge every university student. You have students who graduate political science who never really figure out Westphalia. But read the whole article. And then also read what the Russians proposed to the Ukraine, the Customs Union Board, the head of which is Sergei Glaziev, who's a close ally of Lyndon LaRouche. Read it. Read that versus what Ukraine was offered by Europe. But the standpoint from all of that is Westphalia, which these guys, the Russians, have mastered, which I'll show later on because they do know what Westphalia is. But you have people like George Soros, although he's not my main topic, people like George Soros, people owned by the empire, who attack sovereignty on big world forums. They're paid, thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and everybody's like, "Oh wow, that's amazing. You're so smart." But what is it? You want to read it? Do you want to sit here? Okay. You won't have to. I won't be in your way. Okay, go ahead.
Sovereignty is an anachronistic concept originating in bygone times when society consisted of rulers and subjects, not citizens. It became the cornerstone of international relations with the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648. The rulers of a sovereign state have a responsibility to protect the state's citizens. When they fail to do so, the responsibility is transferred to the international community.
Pretty much to me.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, me and my buddies. We'll take care of you.
You just can't protect them from drugs.
So yeah, sovereignty is an old idea, from a time when you had subjects and rulers. That's not what sovereignty is. Sovereignty challenged the concept of a king and a subject. So this just shows the sophistry, and I'll show much more of that.
Quite good, actually.
Yeah, he's very eloquent.
Pardon me.
Yes,
Pardon me, in this article by George Soros,
it's from his book.
The People's Sovereignty,
Mhm.
is he for the Treaty of Westphalia?
No, he's against it. He says it's an old, bygone concept. It's anachronistic. It means it doesn't fit in today's times. Yeah, so it's not applicable to today's world anymore, because.
Well, see, that actually is interesting that Eugene said that, because they write these things in a way that sounds like they're actually for it, and
Yeah.
yet they're not. So even the thought process of trying to figure out what the heck they're talking about is a confused method to dumb down the society.
Yeah, I'm for human rights. That's what he says. I'm for human rights. That's what Tony Blair says. I couldn't stand the suffering in Iraq, so I had to go there. We have to do something. And that's when they show the bloody pictures of Syrians and Ukrainians in the streets, and pictures of the police beating on people. When I was preparing my briefing, I mean, there are terrible pictures of these Molotov cocktail Nazis killing the police, but I said, well, I'm not going to show that. Because people can show the other side, which you see on CNN and Fox News all the time. I'm going to prove it by getting people to understand the concept. And then they can see the pictures if they want. But yeah, that's how they show people, well, I'm for human rights, but Westphalia is not the way. That's what your congressman says, well, I like Glass-Steagall, but you know, we're not.
Have
Yeah.
Glass-Steagall without having Glass-Steagall?
Yeah. Can't we have a reform without Glass-Steagall? I like to reform the banks, but so that's how you get to them. Now I come to my main topic. That's not a real picture. This is okay.
That's a great picture.
I know.
It may be real.
Might be real. So that's the main topic of discussion to counterpose sovereignty, because this guy championed the move against sovereignty. Tony Blair, who for some reason had an epiphany before 9/11 happened, right before 9/11, that, oh, we need to get off Westphalia. You know, how did he know? I don't know.
So for me, before September 11th, I was already reaching for a different philosophy in international relations from a traditional one that has held sway since the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648. Namely, that a country's internal affairs are for it and don't interfere unless it threatens you or breaches a treaty or triggers an obligation of alliance. I did not consider Iraq fitted into this philosophy, though I could see the horrible injustice done to its people by Saddam.
I know. I couldn't stand all the injustice, so I had to go in there and kill even more people. You know, probably because Saddam wasn't killing people fast enough. And so this is really key because, you know, look at Iraq today, look at Afghanistan today. Anybody who tells you, well, Obama got us out of Iraq and Afghanistan, have you seen what it looks like today? The reason why we're out is because there's nothing left to destroy. We did our job. Good job. Thank you so much. All the Iraqis are saying, you know, thanks, United States, for blowing us up, putting us back 300 years. We were good enough with Saddam, but thanks anyways. But that's, you know, and so that's what the empire is, and that's what people have to be told. You can't fall for this shit anymore. And people realized it over Syria, thanks to our mobilization. All the 3 years of street organizing and on the Capitol Hill with Obama Hitler mustache clicked in. And people said, shit, this is war with Russia. This is not about Syria, because people learned their lesson in Afghanistan and Iraq. It was a big reason why Bush was thrown out. It was a big reason actually why people voted for Obama, because they were tired of war, and Obama promised something better. Now, one of the biggest examples which I'm going to use is this guy. His name is Robert Cooper. He was a top advisor to Tony Blair. His book, which is this Breaking of Nations, and his other publications, they're very well read and, you know, recommended reading for students who are graduating in PhD or doing postgraduate in political affairs or other stuff. He is he then became he works for the European Union, and he actually is a very close advisor to Catherine Ashton, who is the foreign affairs minister from the European Union. She and her board are the ones who actually drafted the agreement, the bill that was presented to Ukraine, the whole trade bill. So he's on it. He's also a member of European Council of Foreign Relations, which means he works with Ashton, which means he's involved in the whole Ukraine dialogue and so on. But he wrote this. He's written a lot. He wrote this, the New Liberal Imperialism, which is an article in The Guardian from 2002. And he actually wrote another one recently, 16th January of this year. He said the EU has provided us with the best Europe we've ever had. Who doesn't believe him? Bob, you don't believe him? But, you know, what is the European Union? Look at Greece. You know, 14 countries have death rates higher than birth rates. The European Union Statistical Index is recommending countries that, hey, maybe your GDP would go up if you include prostitution in your statistics. That's a lot of money, guys, you know? And I think they should include pedophilia in it too. That's a multi-billion-dollar industry. But now, I know, but his paper, The New Liberal Imperialism, it's 9 pages. And if your emails are on that sheet, I'm going to email a lot of stuff, background material to everybody, including this. But I'm going to read some parts of it, which should show you what the way they think and just how ridiculous and how stupid they think we are. And it just shows their stupidity. So he says, in ancient world, order meant empire. Those within the empire had order, culture, and civilization. Outside the empire were barbarians, chaos, and disorder. So that's his concept of history. If you ever had anything good in the world, it was under an empire, right? So then he says, then today, you have 2 kinds of nations. You have the pre-modern nations, which are Somalia, Afghanistan, completely decimated, backward regions. And then you have postmodern nations, which is like Canada. He doesn't include the United States, like Canada, like Commonwealth countries, European Union, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, etc., Singapore. And then he says, this is really fun. And he says that the best example of a postmodern system is the European Union, because it represents security through transparency and transparency through interdependence. Now, remember, this guy works for the European Union. No wonder he's going to write good things about the European Union. It's like Adam Smith, when he wrote Wealth of Nations, he was working for the British Empire. He was on their payroll. Of course he's going to support free trade and talk about free trade being the best thing ever. But that's what he's doing right now. And then he says, this is fun. And he goes through the paper that, okay, how are we going to bridge the distance between postmodern and pre-modern nations? How are we going to deal with these barbarian nations? And he says, the challenge to the postmodern world is to get used to the idea of double standards. Listen on. Among ourselves, we operate on the basis of law and open cooperative security. But when dealing with more old-fashioned kinds of states outside the postmodern continent of Europe, we need to revert to the rougher methods of an earlier era, which is force, preemptive attack, deception, whatever is necessary to deal with those who still live in the 19th century world of every state for itself. Among ourselves, we keep the law, but when we are operating in the jungle, we must use the laws of the jungle. This is the advisor to Europe. I know. Right. But this is the idea that, the world is fixed. You can't change Africa. You can't change Afghanistan. You can just go in there if you want to change something you can kill them. You can kill their leader. You can do what you want through force, preemptive attack, and deception. That's the idea of a double standard. Look at the United States. Any reason that Obama says, well, we gotta stop the killing and the atrocity of Assad. Look at Guantanamo Bay. Look at what United States does to its own citizens. I think by those standards, Obama's gotta go. If the number of angry people in the streets is your standard, look at all these marches we've had in Washington, D.C. Get Obama out, if that's your standard. It's a good standard. So, and he says, he goes on, I think there's some more good stuff, He basically says, so how should we intervene on these nations? The most logical way to deal with chaos, and the one most employed, is colonialization or colonization. It is precisely because the death of imperialism that we are seeing the emergence of pre-modern world. That it's because we don't have a British Empire anymore that you have starvation in Africa, that you have these poor nations. I mean, the sophistry. They can't take care of themselves. They need somebody strong. They need an adult. They need us. They need, and he says that the weak still need the strong, and the strong still need an orderly world. What is needed then is a new kind of imperialism, one acceptable to a world of human rights and cosmopolitan values. And he says that the postmodern European Union offers a vision of cooperative empire, a common liberty, and a common security. And the paper ends. So he basically, that's the British. That's an advisor to the official Tony Blair government who now works for the EU. And I just found this out yesterday that he's actually on the board of the European Council of Foreign Relations, the head of which is Catherine Ashton, the guys who want Ukraine to join the European Union, the great postmodern civilized empire, in their own words, that tells any group, and if you don't, well, we shoot you. So that's the whole Tony Blair right to protect philosophy, the whole right to protect, right to intervene philosophy. And this is also good. He said,
Mrs. Blair,
mhm.
my vision for the new Labour Party is to become as the Liberal Party was in the 19th century, a broad coalition of those who believe in the progress of justice.
Right. The Liberal Party, Disraeli, Palmerston. The guy on the left is Henry Temple, or Lord Palmerston. The guy on the right is John Russell, the grandfather of Bertrand Russell. These people, because look, in the middle of 1800s, Britain had lost the war. America had been created. Then Britain tried to invade again in 1812, lost. The Confederacy failed. So the British were severely weakened. Around that time, a certain movement in the oligarchy started emerging that we need to change our tactics. We need to become a financial empire. We need to promote liberalism, free trade, that what's yours is mine, just as much. And what was formed was the Liberal Party, which was championed by these two guys. Both of them became prime ministers at one time or the other. And under both of them, what you had was the Irish potato famine, 3 famines in India, which killed millions of people, and a lot of other similar atrocities. So that's Tony Blair's vision for the new Labour Party. That was the Liberal Party, to go back to that, to take the leadership that they had. So, and that's what. Now, the rest of my class is going to be to show this British Tony Blair post-Westphalian influence in Obama's government, in what we have today. Because under Tony Blair, what was formed was the NICE, the National Institute of Clinical Excellence, which was a healthcare rationing system. It was the idea of what you have under Obamacare, And what you had was like this guy, Irvin Stelzer. I forget his name. This is something else, but yeah, this is good. So what you had under Tony Blair's healthcare, 2 people are Michael Rawlings from the the NICE, and Sir Donald Berwick, who's running for governor in Massachusetts, by the way, if people don't know. But these guys, and this is Sir Donald Berwick, an American who's running for official. That alone should disqualify him. Anybody who's knighted, I don't know. Is it allowed? I know in India, because I'm from India, Indians, we reject any knight or any knighthood. Because many Indians have rejected it when they're offered it. But Sir Donald Berwick chose to do something else. But the NICE was created, the National Institute of Clinical Excellence was created to destroy clinical excellence, to destroy the healthcare system in Britain. Britain has the highest cancer mortality rate in Europe because their basic agenda is, it's not cost effective. You cost too much. The basis of that is something they described, they invented as QALY, QALY. So this is a small part of a big interview in the Time magazine, which people can, I'll send them the link, but I'll ask the question, you answer. Okay, why is NICE needed? shouldn't you get the drugs you need when you are sick regardless of cost?
All healthcare systems are facing the problem of finite resources and almost infinite demand. And all healthcare systems have implicitly, if not explicitly, adopted some form of cost control. In the US, you do it by not providing healthcare to some people. We are best known for looking at a new drug, device, or diagnostic technique to see whether the increment in the cost of that treatment is worth the increment in the health gain.
How is that measured?
It's based on the cost of a measure called the Quality Adjusted Life Year. A QALY scores your health on a scale from 0 to 1. 0 if you're dead, and 1 if you're in perfect health. You find out as a result of a treatment where a patient would move up the scale. If you do a hip replacement, the patient might start at 0.5 and go up to 0.7, improving by 0.2. You can assume patients live for an average of 15 years following hip replacements. And 0.2 times 15 equals 3 quality adjusted life years. If the hip replacement costs 10,000 GBP,
British pounds?
and about $15,000 to do, it's 10,000 divided by 3, which equals 3,333 GBP, about $5,000. That figure is the cost per quality.
Right. Well, I mean, there's just so many problems in this because how do you determine somebody's in perfect health? What determines perfect health? You know? The second is, what determines the cost of a treatment? Is it the disease itself? Because any cost in healthcare is determined by the economy. It's determined by the system overall. Because your ultimate measure is the dollar. Your ultimate measure is, well, what determines the value of the dollar? Which is today completely arbitrary, which is based on derivatives. So instead of changing the economic system, when you have bankers and the government saying, well, we gotta ration healthcare because it's too expensive, that's when you get the Hitler mustache, which is completely valid. Because they know what they're talking about is bullshit. And any doctor who will tell you QALY is bullshit, because you cannot tell when somebody's in perfect health. And plus, even if the person is living 6 months more or a year more, you can never tell how long somebody's going to live. How can you take a wild guess that, we assume somebody's going to live 15 years after a hip replacement? No, you cannot. Nobody can. So,
Well, doggone, if they live 20 years, that's not right.
right,
They
Right.
live 5 years too long.
right, right. So these are the people who designed Obamacare.
Right.
What's the guy's name again, the second one?
Sir Donald Berwick.
Berwick?
Berwick.
What was he running for?
He's running for the governor of Massachusetts.
Massachusetts.
Yes.
Oh, my goodness.
And who knew that Tony Blair is also he's also an advisor to J.P. Morgan. Yeah, he's paid like $1 million a year to be an advisor to J.P. Morgan. And he was one of the first people who defended the bankers and praised Margaret Thatcher, right? Now, coming to, well, I won't go through this, you know. If I had to write a book on Susan Rice, Samantha Powers, Victoria Nuland, Valerie Jarrett, and Obama, I would call it 50 Shades of Genocide. Have people read the 50 Shades of Grey? It's a very popular, I've heard of it too. It's very popular fiction if you go into Barnes and Nobles and other bookstores. I haven't read it, but it's a gist of a very rich banker having an affair with a very young woman, which is completely sadistic and masochistic and brutal, and it's pretty disgusting liberal porn. But this is what these people gain sadistic pleasure of blowing other nations. So that's what I would call. But this is something really good because especially Susan Rice, she has played a very important role in Obama's administration in pushing foreign wars. And Susan Rice comes directly out of Oxford. She was taught, she was a student there, and she was a student of this guy, Sir Alan Roberts. I think that's his name. Hold on a second. Sir Adam Roberts, this guy on the top left. And one of his students is Susan Rice, and one of his other students is the guy on the bottom, which is Timothy Garden Ash. And this guy, Ash, they both have written a book, Civil Resistance and Power Politics. But they basically had a think tank out of Oxford called, what is it called? Project Democracy. And one of the other think tanks very closely related to them is the National Endowment for Democracy, the NED think tank. The think tank which Helga intervened on 2 days ago in Washington, D.C. These are the think tanks which were created after the Bretton Woods takedown in 1970s, and were created to, I mean, if you read his book, and what you see in Libya, what you saw, these colored revolutions, the Orange Revolution in Ukraine, in Tunisia, Egypt, Syria, it's like word to word. It's like what these people are, and many people who are leading this will tell you, well, we were advised by foreign governments to follow this blueprint. But Susan Rice is one of their students who actually runs Obama's administration, who's a very important part of it. So is this guy McFall on the top left. He is also from Oxford, studied in Oxford on the same scholarship, the Rhodes Scholarship. Because the Rhodes Scholarship was created by Cecil Rhodes, who was an evil British bastard who oversaw a lot of mass killing in Africa. He basically had the concept to rename Africa Rhodesia after him, and to fill it up with the white population, a superior race. That's what he called it. Anyway, so he created a scholarship where they would, and the funding would come from the Rothschilds. So these people, the people that are on Rhodes Scholarship are people who are specifically handpicked and groomed to do the bidding of British liberal imperialism policies. So, and the biggest examples are McFall, Susan Rice. But there's every rule has an exception. There's another Rhodes Scholar who's not evil, is Bill Clinton, who actually went to Britain and actually, through his stay there, developed a very genuine and American hatred of the British, partly because of the way they treated him, because he's not nobility. He's actually white trash, what people would call. His background is entirely that. Yeah. So he, like Roosevelt, anyways, that's a whole different story. But Susan Rice, Samantha Powers, who replaced Susan Rice, and actually heads the right to protect policy of Obama. She and her husband, Cass Sunstein. Anybody knows who Cass Sunstein was? He was an Obama's advisor, very top advisor. He wrote papers in 2000. He's out of Harvard. He's a Harvard professor. He wrote papers that anybody who is a conspiracy theorist, anybody who disagrees with the official line, anybody who thinks 9/11 is an inside job, should be taxed or brainwashed. We should reprogram them. And if people don't know that, okay, I'm going to show a very good video.
Tax or brainwash? Tax. Pay tax. Pay tax. Or brainwash.
There we go. Okay, this is worth. Yeah. This is him being confronted. Excuse the ad.
My name is Bill DeBerg from.
Bill DeBerg.
in college. And I know you wrote many articles, but I think the most telling one about you is the 2008 one called Conspiracy Theories, where you openly advocated government agents infiltrate activist groups of 9/11 Truth and also stifle dissent online. I was wondering, why do you think it's the government's job, or why do you think the government should go after family members who have questions about 9/11, responders who were lied to about the air, survivors whose testimony commits, and also government whistleblowers that were gagged because they released information that contradicts the official story? Why do you think the government should do that?
I think as Ricky said, I've written hundreds of articles, and I remember some and not others. I remember very well. I hope I didn't say that. But whatever was said in that article, my role in government is to oversee federal rulemaking in a way that is wholly disconnected from the vast majority of my academic writing, including that. So,
And I'm just asking because you may be the next Supreme Court Justice, or we're going to, and you did write those things, and that's why I don't bring them up to you.
So, and all I can say is that there are a lot of things that I've written, I guess, and there are even more things I've said to have written.
He can't
I
answer.
agree with some of the things I've written, but I'm not exactly sure. I focus on what my boss wants me to do.
I just want to know, is it safe to say that you retract saying that conspiracy theorists should be banned or taxed for having an opinion online? Is it safe to say that?
I don't remember the article very well, so. I hope I didn't say either of those things.
But you did, and it's written. Do you retract them?
I'm focused on my job.
So you're not retracting them. Do you still believe that? Do you still believe that people shouldn't have freedom of speech?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about this. So I can go on the record.
He's the man who wrote about it.
So yeah, it's a good video, and that's who Cass Sunstein is. He's no longer in Obama's, because he was just too much political baggage. And this video came out, the papers came out, and it didn't hit the mainstream media like it should have, oh my God, but he had to go. So this is, I mean, you know, coming back to today, this is what the empire is. It's completely double standard sophistry. Like this guy McFall, you know, he basically, when he was put in as ambassador to Russia, he comes from this total evil background. He was put in there to make sure Putin is not reelected. He was put in there in 2011, very, you know, months ahead of Putin's, the Russian elections. And he basically said himself that, you know, he said most Russian watchers are diplomats or specialists on security or Russian culture. I am neither. I am a specialist in democracy, anti-dictatorial movements, and revolutions. And he said, you know, he's talking about Ukraine, he's talking about the government interventions there, and he says, does this kind of intervention violate international law? Not anymore. You know, he says, there was a time when championing state sovereignty was a progressive idea. But today, those who revere the sovereignty of the state above all else often do so to preserve autocracy, while those who champion the sovereignty of the people are the new progressives. Because they call themselves the champion of the people. People sovereignty versus the state sovereignty. Assad versus Syria. Yanukovych versus Ukraine. Putin versus Russians. It's total sophism, because the only real fight has been between Zeus and Prometheus. That's it. You may have, like in Westphalia, the treaty, these people were not best buddies. You think the founding fathers were best buddies? They were totally opposing. But they knew it's them versus the empire. That's the fundamental difference. So now you know, this is one of our beautiful EIRs, Peace of Westphalia or World War III. It's in 2006 when we were going for the Oasis plan and stuff. So LaRouche knows what he's talking about. He's been organizing Asia, Russia, China, India, a lot of circles in the United States and Europe on this. And so, oh yeah, Dick Cheney in his biography said that his only regret is he didn't kill more Syrians. You know, this is from his biography.
Dick Cheney's memoir, In My Time. It sounds as excruciating as you might imagine. No apologies, no regrets, plenty of self-satisfied machismo. If Cheney had it all to do over again, the only thing he'd do differently is bomb the shit out of Syria. Here's a rundown of the highlights. In June 2007, Cheney urged George W. Bush to bomb a suspected nuclear reactor in Syria. Quote, I again made the case for U.S. military action against the reactor, Mr. Cheney wrote about a meeting on the issue. But I was a lone voice. After I finished, the president asked, does anyone here agree with the vice president? Not a single hand went up around the room. The Israelis eventually took it out. He tried to get Colin Powell fired after 2004 for insufficiently supporting the war in Iraq. His resignation in January 2005, Cheney says, was for the best. He repeatedly offered his resignation to Bush on account of his being the most hated figure in national politics and feared being a drag on Bush's re-election ticket. He also kept a signed, post-dated resignation letter in his man-sized office safe to be opened on the occasion of a debilitating heart attack, stroke, or reclamation to Hades. Cheney claims that then House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, then Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle, Representative Jane Harman, and Senator Jay Rockefeller, all Democrats, unanimously approved of the administration's illegal, warrantless wiretapping program and agreed that the full Congress should be kept in the dark about it. Unsurprisingly, he thought the Iraq War went swimmingly. While recovering from heart surgery in 2010, he was unconscious for several weeks, during which he had a prolonged, vivid dream that he was living in an Italian villa, pacing the stone paths to get coffee and newspapers. Wasn't that an episode of The Sopranos?
So, I mean, there's really no difference between Cheney's policies and what Obama's doing. You know, these neocons wanted to bomb the shit out of Syria, which Obama almost did, right? Now, you've had presidents, you've had people in American presidents, among the vast majority of horse shit, you've had some real patriots, like FDR, who knew what sovereignty is, who knew what human value is. And this is really good. You have to do some more reading?
Just look at time.
Okay, yeah. How much, 15 minutes?
No,
Not even that?
no, we have to be out of here at 5.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. This is a beautiful excerpt from FDR's book, which is As He Saw It, which is on Bob Wesser's website if people want to download it, right? I'll end it. It's basically that's the god of Saturn eating his own children. That's the empire we have today. That's Zeus. That's the empire, which is just kill, kill, kill. I mean, it's a really important polemic because he's eating up his children. There's nothing left. You're killing your own future. That's how an empire survives. Well, it survives by killing it, eating itself out, right? Yeah. That's what you have today. That's the British Empire. So my point is to make people very clear. I organize out of Canada, mostly. And what I said in the beginning was that you have the rest of the world is looking to the United States for action and leadership. On understanding what's at stake is the idea of sovereignty. The problem is it takes a sovereign person to defend a sovereign nation. And what you have is, that's the fight, is to change you have to challenge the intellect of the people. That's what's going to cause the revolution. You need a leadership and you want to change their intellect. Those are the words of LaRouche actually from last week, I think, was a discussion with the internal members. I end my class. Any questions? You raised your hand?
So it's all under what the clean policy was from the past 4 years or so, which was the Cooper Commission.
Mm-hmm.
The world's population rapidly from 7 billion
Yeah.
to less than 1.
Yeah. What's your question about it?
All this is under the clean policy.
Yeah, well, that's what you had in Westphalia, the 30 Years' War. The European population was 50% less. It was completely decimated. All of Europe was dead. If it wasn't for Colbert, it was under Colbert that a lot of Canada and North America was, populated. A lot of French Canada, Quebec, is because of Colbert's reforms, where he would encourage shiploads of people, no, just go and colonize, build something there. We wouldn't have a North America if it wasn't for Colbert. Yes?
The rural dictacy of the British, especially the Afro and the Indians,
Mm-hmm.
the idea is that we were brainwashed to think that the British were our saviors.
Mm-hmm.
And the point
Yeah.
that they weren't. They were the murderers.
Yeah.
And they destroyed people's lives. So
Mm-hmm.
we don't know our history.
Right. I missed a lot. Like, I wanted to go through a lot, but because of time, I'm going to send out the PowerPoint and a lot of follow-up material for my class. Any other questions?
Okay, so this is really interesting and very important. So, we think that Treaty of Westphalia should be adapted in Europe, in Ukraine, or in the US.
Well, you already have a lot of international treaties that should be defended. The United Nations Charter, the charter that Russia and the United States signed in 1994, I think called the Budapest Agreement, which binds America and Russia to protect the sovereignty of Ukraine and the surrounding regions. There are a lot of treaties, but that already exist that can be upheld, and that's what Russia is saying, because and the Constitution is based on Westphalia. The Constitution says any president who wishes to take us to war has to go through Congress. And if Obama does it, there is no war. No way they can start World War III without the United States. They need American thermonuclear arsenal. They're not going to do it with Israel. The British are not going to risk their necks. They're too smart for that. But you have Americans who are too stupid who might go along. All of the staff comes from Oxford. All of them all the neocons actually, even Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, they come from think tanks which were created by London. And the EIR, the LaRouche Pub, is filled with extensive work that nobody else has done. Yes?
Well, when President Obama said in the State of the Union address that he wanted to bypass Congress, congressional approval,
Yeah.
on certain things or measures,
Yeah.
what exactly did he have in mind? He knows that he cannot declare war against the country without the approval of Congress, but can he take?
But he's going to do it because...
can he take minor measures, like
No, he's not going to take
sending
any
in
minor
troops
measures.
somewhere
Look,
to,
no.
that he doesn't need?
No, you're not going to have any troops. The World War III is going to be a 2-minute war. And in the words of John F. Kennedy, the living are going to envy the dead. That's what's going to happen. Obama's not going to take any minor measures. This guy is a maniac who's going to destroy the United States because that's a Nero. He's a Nero. Remember that. The fundamental psychosis, he's a Nero. When Hitler put his gun to his head, it's not, oh, pity me, I'm dying. It's a revenge against the world. When Nero killed himself, he said, I'm too good for you. I'm going to punish you by killing myself. That's what Obama's going to do. He's going to blow the world up because he says, well, you disappointed me. Shame on you. Shame on you for not recognizing how awesome I am. I'm the best thing better than Jesus. He really thinks that. This guy is psychotic, which is an extra, that along with the whole financial system collapsing, everyone here should call their congressman on Monday.